talked about last week, the kinds of things that allow us that pioneer church planting. And now we take one more step back and we say, okay, so how do we as individuals, how do we prepare ourselves? How do we step into what God is doing? How do we figure out what our part is? And I told you some of my story being overseas last week, and tonight I want to back up and I want to tell you a little bit of the story of how God got our family overseas, and also share with you some. I don't know if you can see these really well, but the outtakes from one of our early prayer cards where my one, trying to get our kids to stand still, he's punching my daughter, and you can't see the picture though. On the other side, I have this great goatee. I miss that goatee. But anyway, that's us through the years. When I was growing up, my family attended church regularly. We were very involved, but I did not become a follower of Jesus until I was about 16 years old. And the church that I attended taught me a lot about the Bible, but it did not help me to understand what it meant to really walk that out and to live that out. And so it wasn't until I got to college, I went to the University of Illinois, that I was involved with Campus Crusade for Christ, and I began to understand what it meant to walk out my faith for Jesus Christ. Around that time, one of the guys that was involved with the Crusade was a guy named Stephen. He came to me and he said, "Rick, are you willing to go anywhere and do anything for the cause of Jesus Christ?" And I really didn't know what to say to him. Nobody had ever asked me something like that. And in fact, I was a little bit scared, because if I say yes, I'm willing to go anywhere and do anything, God might ask me to go somewhere and do something. And would I really be willing to do that? I didn't know. And so I wrestled with that. Would I be willing, if God said go to Africa, or if God said go to a communist country, if God said leave the comforts of what was home, would I be willing to do that? And around that time, Crusade was having a conference on 40 things that happened to you when you became a Christian. And I went to this conference, and as I was listening to the speaker, he only got through like 10 of them. But I was so overwhelmed by God's grace and what it meant to be in Christ and the way that he had lavished blessing upon blessing in my life, that I thought to myself, if God was to ask me to go somewhere and do something, he probably could take care of me. He probably would provide for what I needed. And so I decided, I'm going to say yes. And so I told Stephen, yes, I'm willing to go anywhere and do anything for Jesus. And he pulled out this piece of paper called the Caleb Declaration. I don't know, does anybody remember the Caleb Project? Anybody heard of that? Okay, the Joshua Project is around now, but before the Joshua Project was the Caleb Project. And it started at Penn State University, and it was some college students who wanted to go overseas, and they had seen so many of their friends, I think, get distracted on that way, that they had come up with an accountability system. What it was, you signed this declaration, and you sent it in, and you were saying, I'm willing to go anywhere, do anything, and then every month they would send you Bible studies and this booklet with articles and things that they had written about missions and about what God was doing around the world. And in it was this piece of paper you ripped out, and it asked, what are you reading on missions, and what are you doing to prepare yourself for missions? And it was all these questions, and you filled them out, you put down maybe some prayer requests, mailed it in, and then a couple weeks later you got a postcard that said, hey, we prayed for you today, and that sort of thing. And so I signed this declaration. It was based on based off of Numbers 13:30. In Numbers, you'll remember, Moses gets the spies, one from each of the 12 tribes, and he sends them into the promised land to check things out. And when they come back, Joshua and Caleb give the thumbs up. They say it is fantastic. This is a land flowing with milk and honey. But the other 10 were like, they're big people. They're scary. I mean, we look like ants compared to them. We can't do it. And Caleb gets everybody quiet. And in verse 30 he says, then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. And that's the Caleb Declaration. We're saying, I'm willing to go anywhere, do anything. We should go up and inherit the land because we can surely do it. God will be with us. This is what he's called us to. And so I mailed that thing in, and they would pray for me, and I would do those different different studies and things to keep my heart focused and to be moving forward, holding myself accountable with others. We had a group of people that had a similar heart there at the University of Illinois, and so we would go to conferences. They had these mandate conferences. We'd go over to Purdue, and we'd hear David Bryant or George Verwer or one of these guys talking about missions and calling us to be involved. And it never became quite what the movements of some of the past collegiate movements, and yet our hearts were just so ready to do whatever God would ask. We were so hungry to serve him. I spent a summer in Virginia Beach, Virginia, doing outreach, just every day, and we would be sharing the gospel. And I did it so often that any conversation I could steer into a gospel presentation, almost to the point where it was scary. Yeah, it was too much. And I graduated college, and right before that I had gotten engaged, and then right after college got married, and my wife had a similar heart, a desire to go overseas. And so we got married, and she was going to medical school, and I went to seminary. And we ended up in Rockford, Illinois, and we were we were attending an evangelical free church there. And the very first Sunday, God is so gracious. The very first Sunday, we went to this Sunday school class for newly married couples. And the guy that was teaching it, when he heard that we were interested in missions, said, "Rick, have I got a ministry for you?" And next thing I knew, I was teaching children's church and 6th grade Sunday school and leading a youth group for Laotian students, for Laotian kids, in downtown Rockford, Illinois. This church that we were attending had helped these Laotian believers buy the building that had been their first church building down in downtown Rockford. And so while the parents would worship in Lao, we would, or in Hmong, or whatever, we would be doing an English Sunday school and children's church. And I would sing songs with these kids, and I would tell them, "Let's see if we can sing it loud enough for your parents to hear." And they got so excited. Anyway, but it was that hey, you want to be a missionary? There are folks right here that you can learn to share cross-culturally. You can begin to experience what it's like. I ate some of the craziest things ever at a potluck while I was helping out at that church. To this day, I'm not sure if they were living or dead. But the other thing that happened at that church is that I ended up doing an internship while I was in seminary there, and with the missions pastor, and I helped to start the Potential Missions Fellowship. It was a fellowship for people that were interested in going into missions, and we would get together about every month, and we would have missionaries come and speak to us, or those who had been on a short-term trip would share. And it was a chance for us, again, to encourage one another, to pray with one another, and to spur one another on to see this vision that we had become reality. My wife and I wanted to do a short-term trip, and so we had hoped to go to Nepal, and their medical staff wasn't going to be there, and then we thought, well, we'll go to Pakistan, and they couldn't take us either, so we ended up in Taiwan, which wasn't quite as unreached as what we wanted, but it was a great experience for us to go and to experience what it was like to live in another culture and to begin to minister and to try to find out what would we do, how would it work for us to be a part of this mission that God had called us to. And then 10 years after I had signed that Caleb Declaration, and my wife had also around that same time felt that God was calling her to missions. 10 years later, we were on a plane going to Jordan. And if you had told us when we first felt that God had called us that it was going to take us 10 years to get there, we would have thought that was crazy. We couldn't imagine that it would take that long. And yet, medical school and residency, seminary and pastoring for a number of years, we had a couple children along the way. There were things that God had to do to get us ready so that we could do what he had called us to do once we got there. As I mentioned, tonight we're in lesson 15. And what I hope to do in the little bit of time that we have together is to explore ideas, to maybe suggest some practical ways that we can live lives of significance, that we can step into our part to play in God's purpose. You have heard so many things, and you've probably had so many things stirred in your heart, and it can be perhaps a little bit overwhelming. Maybe not. Maybe you know exactly what God's calling you to. But maybe there's something bigger, or maybe there's something a little different. And as we explore what it means to be a world Christian, what it means to have that perspective that sees not just Knoxville or wherever it is you might live, but the world as your place of ministry. Perhaps we can suggest some things and maybe even help for you to establish some patterns and some rhythms in your life that will help you to stay the course and be moving toward what God has called you to. My heart would be that as you leave from this course, that your lives would be so intimately connected with Jesus that you would have a real sense of his love for you and how he desires you to walk out that relationship wherever he takes you. But before we press in a little further, I want to pray. I want to ask God to bless the evening together, and then we'll keep going. Father, I thank you so much for the opportunity that we have tonight to just to begin the end. As we finish, we get to begin and think what happens next, and to begin to make those decisions about how we're going to live out the things that you've stirred, how we're going to live out the things we feel you've put on our hearts. And maybe for some of us we've already thought that, but for some of us we're overwhelmed. And so I just pray tonight, as we talk, as we reflect, as we share, that Lord, your Spirit would be guiding us, that you would help us to hold on to the things that are ours and from you, and let go of the things that aren't. And Lord God, our heart is to see the knowledge of you cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. Our heart is to see people from every tribe, language, and nation before the throne worshiping the Lamb. Lord, we want to be a part of that. We want to be used by you to increase your glory as there are more worshipers declaring the greatness of our God. And so guide our time together tonight, I pray. In Jesus' name. Amen. All right. When I was studying Arabic, George Kelsey, also known as Abu Billy, once said that we get to the end of the semester and we were all exhausted from a semester of learning Arabic. But he would say, don't let up. Persevere to the end. You can learn more in the last week of class than you learned the entire semester combined because we've laid such a great foundation. You know so much more now. So there is a temptation as you get to lesson 15 to skim the readings, to half-heartedly approach the homework, to get the review done, your project's finished, and your senioritis has hit, and you are over with this class. Don't let it happen. You can learn more in lesson 15 than all the 14 before because of the foundation that's been laid. So press on to the end. Persevere. Be diligent. Is that effective? As we're interacting tonight, if you have questions or comments that you want to add to something, please go ahead and raise your hand, and let's do that. Let's let this be a little more interactive as we go through. There are 4 main points to lesson 15, and so I'm going to do them in maybe a little bit different order, I think, than the way the readings do it in the study guide. But we'll work through those, and hopefully I'll add some useful things to it as well. World Christian Discipleship, life on purpose and working with Christ. As you come into this lesson, it really is about how do we establish in our lives practices, how do we establish in our lives disciplines, how do we live our lives on purpose so the things that we know we're supposed to be a part of are things that we actually end up being a part of. So that the things we say we really hold as values and we believe are important in our priorities actually become important and priorities in our lives. We are followers of Jesus, and he has invited us into the story that he is writing. And we have been drawn into this cosmic war that is between the forces of good and evil. And yet our leader is of the utmost worth. And he is a leader who has promised that he will be with us always to the very end of the age. And so, as world Christians, as a people who look at the world differently than perhaps others, day to day we are disciples who see Christ's global cause as our overriding priority. We love God. We love others. And we look to God to help us to understand how to walk that out. So how do we begin to live life on purpose? How do we begin to walk this out? David Bryant suggests in your reading that if we are to grow as those who exemplify God's love for the world, we have to give ourselves over to loving and following the risen Christ. If we are going to love people, we have to experience God's love first, so that we have those resources and we're able to do that. And he says, there's this idea in the world today, a la Rick Warren, that we are to live this purpose-driven life. And he says, in some ways, that's a really good way to talk about being a world Christian disciple, that we have this purpose, and this purpose can guide us into the way we should live. But what he says is, as good as that is, the better way for us to live is a person-driven life. That we would live a life of intimacy with Jesus, and that out of that relationship would give rise to the things we do, the service we offer. That the purpose would not trump the person, but that the person of Jesus would be our priority, and from him and from that relationship we would draw what our part is. Because it's really easy for us, and I'm pointing the finger at me when I say this, it's really easy for us to see the purpose and to run off trying to do it, to earn points with God, to impress other people, and to do it in my own strength. And actually be doing things that weren't mine to do in the first place because I didn't wait and allow Jesus and the Holy Spirit to direct me into those things that were mine to do. Who we are becoming is more important than what we do. We have to believe that. That the person that I am becoming, the person that God is making me from the inside out, is more important than what I do. Jesus said it himself in Matthew 7. He said, good trees bear good fruit, bad trees can't bear good fruit. So if we're not becoming those good trees, if our inside isn't living and beautiful, then what comes out, no matter how it might appear, is not going to be fruit that lasts. We serve a God of intimacy and action. And as we have that intimate relationship with him, it can then lead us into action. Consider Mark chapter 3. In verse 14, Jesus, it says, appointed 12 that they might be with him and he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. So, first thing to notice, the priority, the first thing, his purpose in appointing them was that they might be with him. It was about relationship. They were going to walk with Jesus. They were going to learn about Jesus. They were going to see his heart. They were going to experience his love. That was the priority, relationship. Especially in the Bible, especially in Hebrew writings. You list things in the order of priority, and that relationship is the priority. And then that he might send them out to preach and have authority and to drive out demons. So out of that relationship comes the action. Out of that relationship comes what they were to do. So too, we are called first and foremost to Jesus the person, to know him, to love him, to be connected deeply to him. And out of that relationship then comes our action and our service. Our action for God needs to arise out of that deep abiding relationship with God. John 15, Jesus says it this way, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So we have to maintain that. That has to be our priority. Before we even continue, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just take a couple minutes, and we're going to do, at different points we're going to pause this evening, and sometimes it's going to be personal reflection, like right now where it's just you. Sometimes it'll be discussion around the table. Sometimes we'll all be talking together. But I want you to just take a moment and just quietly reflect on what are the places in your life where you feel most connected or you connect most intimately with Jesus? What are the places where you experience him most profoundly? And as he brings those to mind, thank him for those things. And then ask him if there are any places he's inviting you to press in to connect more deeply with him. So I put the questions up here as well. What are the places in your life right now where you connect most intimately with Jesus, thanking him for those, and then ask him if there's any place he might be inviting you to press in to connect more deeply with him. So we'll just take like a minute or two to just to ponder that, and if you have an extra piece of paper, you may want to jot some things down. For some of us, we could spend like an hour just on those questions, and so to spend 2 minutes really doesn't seem like it does justice. But hopefully it at least gets you started, and I'd encourage you, if you didn't really satisfy yourself in those answering those things, to come back to those questions later. And especially if you sense an invitation, a place where you can press in for more and connect more deeply, then I really encourage you, don't ignore that prompting, but respond to it and obey that. When we come to a course like Perspectives that presents us with so much information and different things touch different people's hearts, we can have this desire that we would be different. But it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming. How do we live differently? How do we change? Many of us, we would go to, maybe when we were in high school or even in college, we went to retreats and we had these mountaintop experiences, and for 2 or 3 days it was great, and then suddenly we were back in the same kind of patterns. Or you were away at school or someplace and you had some profound experience and you went home to visit your family and got sucked right back into the old ways of doing things. And it's so frustrating. How do we actually experience change? And I'm just going to suggest a couple things. Dallas Willard, in his book Renovation of the Heart, suggests that there's 3 things that are necessary as we desire or want the Holy Spirit even to do change in us. The first is a vision. We need to have a compelling vision of how things would be if whatever it is happened. So, for example, if we desire to see our lives transformed into the image of Jesus Christ, we have this vision of what it might look like for us to be intimately connected to Him. Or if we desire to see ourselves become world Christians and to have God's purposes in our heart, we have an idea perhaps of what that might look like. We've just seen in perspectives all these things that God might be doing or is doing, and we've heard stories, and we thought, I want to be part of something like that. And so it may be that God is stirring those kinds of things up in us, and there's this compelling vision, something that we want to see happen and be different in our lives. And the danger is we put off taking any concrete steps to see that happen. And if we do put it off, then it becomes less likely that things will change. But if we have that vision, then what comes next is an intention. Yes, I see what it would be like for that. I see what it would be like for me to be in that type of ministry or to do those kinds of things or whatever it might be. And so I have this intention that I want to be obedient. I want to step in. I want to see God do these things in me. I want to be the kind of person who makes friendships with the Hindus and the Muslims and the Buddhists that are around me, or can answer their questions on campus, or is going overseas to serve in a place that I would never have imagined. But we have to not just have an intention. The saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We have to move beyond that and make a decision that we actually will put into practice. Intention has to lead to decision. What will we do differently because of perspectives? What will we do differently? How will we live differently if we want to see something new in our lives? Take a moment around your table, and is there something? Well, we won't do this right now. We'll come back. But as you ponder what your intention is, and as you make a decision that there is something God is asking you to do, you need to share that decision with a trusted friend or a pastor or a small group so that they can encourage you, they can keep you accountable to that decision, whatever it might be. We'll come back in a minute to some of these things. And then the third thing, so you have a vision, we have an intention, but then how do we do it? What are the means by which we put this into practice? What are the means by which we can actually see this become a reality? I mean, we've heard so many ideas already in this class, and you're going to read some in the readings this week. I'm going to throw out a bunch at you today. Chad has suggested at different points a number of different resources, and so have others. So many different possibilities. And so how do we decide which ones are the ones that we're supposed to step into and are the ones that will help us to step into our calling and God's purpose? And I hope that as we move through this evening, we will begin to help that make sense for you. That we'll begin to integrate the lessons that we've been learning and the desires and the yearnings of your heart that God's stirring and awakening. And there will be some concrete steps that you can take beyond even maybe what you've already thought of. So it won't be just good intentions or wishful thinking, but it will become reality. One of the articles in the reading this week is called Life on Purpose. And in it they introduce different practices and different disciplines that can help us as world Christians. And I'm going to highlight some of those. They start with the practices and then move on to the disciplines, and I think that's backwards. I think the disciplines, as we enter into those, are what prepare our hearts so that we can go and do the practices. Like I said before, I think the intimacy in the relationship with Jesus gives rise to the action. And so I'm going to start with the disciplines because I'm the one with the microphone. And then we'll move on to the others as well. To me, this is why it is, it's so important that we have that we have right hearts, and that out of those right hearts will come those right actions, and we will be that person-driven disciple rather than just a purpose-driven disciple. So starting with the disciplines of the world Christian lifestyle. And the first one I want to suggest is not one in the book. This is one for me. It's healthy life rhythms. We have a mistaken notion in the church that busyness is equal to godliness. That the busier I am is evidence of how useful I am to God, and therefore a spiritual way of operating. If you ask me to do something and I tell you I can't because I've already got 10 things arranged for that day or that hour, obviously I'm a very spiritual person. And let me just, for the record, say that's nonsense. Busyness does not equal godliness. If anything, busyness actually keeps us from being able to be sensitive, I think, to God's Spirit, and it gets in the way often of what God is wanting to do in our lives. I was really convicted one time. I'd been asking God to give me patience. I'd been asking God to help me not to be so cranky, and I had been just really praying that God would just change my heart. And somebody said to me, well, Rick, have you thought that maybe you just need a little more sleep? I'm like, oh, no, this is a spiritual issue. I can't go to bed earlier. I mean, I have things that I have to do for God. But I was so convicted that I thought, maybe that, okay. I looked back and I realized that there was this pattern. Nights that I actually got enough sleep, I wasn't cranky, and I had patience, and nights I didn't. So it wasn't a spiritual problem after all. It was me being just, doing the right thing. So anyway. So busyness and burning the candle at both ends does not make us spiritual. If anything, it helps to reduce our spirituality. So what I want to encourage is that we need to guard our time. We need to establish in our lives rhythms and patterns that will help us to be spiritually, emotionally, and physically healthy. Now, one of the things that I encourage people to do is establish a rule of life or a spiritual rhythm. And a rule of life goes back to monastic days. It was simply a pattern for the monks to live so that they could do all the things that they were supposed to do. They had certain times for prayer, they had certain times for their service and other things. For us, it really is about establishing a sacred rhythm or a spiritual rhythm where we consider what it is that we desire God to do in our lives, or what it is we would like to see, the change we would like to see. And then we ask, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, we say, okay, how do I get from where I am to where I want to be? If I want to be more in love with Jesus, or if I want to be more of a world Christian, what has to change in my life so I'm moving in that direction? Daily, I need to be in God's Word and prayer, maybe. Maybe it's every so often I have to be, once a week I should be in church. Maybe once a week I should be meeting with a small group. But what are the rhythms? What are the patterns? The things I should do daily, the things I should do weekly, the things I should do monthly, so that what I say is my desire is actually something I'm moving toward. It can't be like me and my desire for patience, just simply praying and waiting for God to somehow just put it in me. We have a part to play in it as well. Before you go this evening, I'm going to give you a sheet, I'll do it during the break, that will help you, I think, not only with this idea of establishing some healthy rhythms in terms of maybe a spiritual approach, but also in terms of even just thinking about the disciplines and the practices that would be part of a healthy rhythm for you as a world Christian. And so I'll give those out at break, and we'll explain those in a little bit. But what I'm going to ask you to do right now is, I keep forgetting to advance my slides because this is the first time I've done this, and I don't have all my slides marked properly in my text. But what I want to do right now is I'm going to ask you to close your eyes in a second, and I'm going to read a passage of Scripture. And hopefully this won't seem too odd, but what I'm going to ask you to do is to put yourself in the place of Bartimaeus in this story. And I'll explain as we go through it, but I want you to hear Jesus' question to Bartimaeus as a question to you. And then we're going to pause, and I'm going to give you an opportunity just to be quiet and to answer Jesus when he asks you that question. So if you're willing to close your eyes, if you trust me enough, and the people at your table enough to do that, let's do that, and I will. I'm going to read Mark 10:46-52. Imagine it's a hot day in Jericho. The sun is beating down. There's maybe a little bit of a breeze, but it's a hot breeze, not a lot of shade. And you hear a commotion in the distance, and Mark writes that, "Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, 'Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me!' Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, 'Son of David, have mercy on me!' Jesus stopped and said, 'Call him.' And so they called to the man, 'Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you.' Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and he came to Jesus." So you've been led to Jesus, and hear him ask you this question. What do you want me to do for you? Take a moment to tell Jesus what it is you want him to do for you. You may want to write some of those things down, but just take a moment or two and we'll just answer that question. What do you want me to do for you? The blind man answered Jesus, saying, "Rabbi, I want to see." And Jesus heard the blind man, and I believe he's heard each of you, and maybe you're still even telling him what it is that you want. But to Bartimaeus he said, "Go, your faith has healed you." And immediately Bartimaeus received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. And I believe that Jesus has heard whatever is on your heart, what that desire is. And I encourage you to take time this week to sit with him and to prayerfully consider how you can establish those rhythms, how you can establish those patterns in your life so the things that you desire would begin to become reality. And I encourage you not to put a lot of time off. Like, don't wait till the end of the week. Try to do that even tonight or tomorrow morning. To just go ahead and to reflect and to ask, Jesus, what has to change in my life so I'm moving in that direction? Because it would be great if Jesus could just wave his Holy Spirit wand and those things that we desire to see would suddenly be in our hearts. But the reality is Philippians chapter 2 is true. We have to work out our fear and we have to work out our salvation in fear and trembling, even as it's God who's at work within us, to will and to work according to his purpose. We have to be active in the process. We have to create space so the Holy Spirit can change us. We can't just keep doing the exact same things and think that it's going to produce a different result. That, as you may have heard, is the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And so, if that's really the desire of our heart, we're going to change something. All right, well, we've spent a lot of time on healthy life rhythms, and we should press on. A second discipline that's important is community. In 1 Corinthians 15:33, Paul says, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." He was actually quoting the poet Meander when he said that. One of the biggest obstacles we face in our relationship with Jesus, but also as we're trying to put our intentions into practice, as we're trying to see something different happen, is the people around us. They may not share our vision. They may think we're crazy. They may do everything they can, actively or passively, to thwart what it is we're wanting to do. They may think we're fanatics. They may think we're holier than thou. They may say all kinds of things to us because they don't get it and they don't understand. When I was thinking about how God had moved Angie and I from that time when we made our decision that we wanted to be in cross-cultural ministry to those 10 years till when we actually got there, in between, God gave us amazing community. We had people around us who were encouraging us on that path. Those friends that would go to the conferences with us, people that we would pray with at school, other people who had signed the Caleb Declaration and had that heart to go anywhere and do anything. We got into a church and some of our best friends were on their way to Bangladesh, and other people that we knew had a heart to be involved in mission aviation. And suddenly we were around people that had that similar heart. The Potential Missions Fellowship, we had people from 19 years old to 60 years old who had a heart to serve God and to pray for God's people to see the gospel unleashed around the world. And so it was really hard not to be caught up in that vision and that desire. Then we moved from Rockford down to Peoria. And my wife was in residency. I began pastoring this tiny little church. And they didn't have that same heart. They didn't have that same vision. We didn't have friends who had that same passion. And suddenly my wife was actually earning an income. When we were both in school, we lived below the poverty line, but God was gracious. When we went to residency, suddenly we actually had money. And after 3 years of that, there was that temptation. We could actually stay here, and we could send a lot of people overseas. And that call that we had originally received was kind of fuzzy. We even had Angie's dad, who really didn't want us to go overseas, who said he built a house on this beautiful bluff. It had an amazing view of the Illinois River. And he said, "I'll give it to you if you will stay." I actually think that may have been the thing that pushed us over the edge. And the next day we started working on our applications to go overseas because we knew that God had called us. And even though the community around us was no longer spurring us on toward that, it was still God's calling us in our hearts. But I just say that to say it's really important for you to find community, to find people who have that same heart and that same desire as you do, whether it be in your family, if it's friends that you live with, or people that you know from church. Find people that will walk that path and encourage you. I have always sought, wherever I've been, to have at least one person that I can meet with regularly, whose life is so full of Jesus that it inspires me to want to live. So the days I come when I am just over it, I'll sit and talk to that person and I'll think to myself, I want that. And it motivates me to pursue again. And when we have those people whose heart is for Jesus, it helps us to keep the flames alive and keep us on that path. So community, we cannot, I don't think, underestimate how important community is in this journey. Here in Knoxville and in the area, at least around here, there are a number of really good churches with really good missions programs. Hopefully you've experienced that. There's campus ministries that have that heart, and there are people that are involved in those things. There's groups like the Knoxville International Network, and we'll talk about KIN a little bit later, But there are ways that if you have that desire to stay in community with people that have like mind, you can do it. But let's take a moment around your table and share 2 or 3 ways, to share one way if you want, but come up with some ways that you could practically practice the discipline of community where you are. Maybe some things you're already doing, but maybe there are some creative ways that you could expand what you're doing as well. Or, they may be things that you intend to do once Perspectives is over and you have free time again. So.
They didn't give up. Always trying to look for guys and girls that are beyond where I am. They're lost. We can ask for people. Just trying to sit there and spend as much time just to say, what path that God told for you, one of those things. So I think for me, look back. So I think by God's grace, you have to work through. Enjoy talking about things right there. There's always kind of on the front.
Just kind of like get that here and get all fired up. I mean, I'm involved with missions like the church, but just try to really talk to others.
Stay in touch regularly with people from other countries that I've been involved with. Kind of encourage, sort of a long distance thing. It's mutual because they're also mature and they're also doing the work that's on my heart, just doing a different culture. So it's always a risk. I think mutual.
If I go somewhere, get to go in there and hear something tells me I try to get on their list.
You got to get it while they're here, right?
Or I talk to them as much as I can. Try to stay connected. Well, not like if I go back to Charlotte, partially like this. Last time I was in Florida, visiting. I just started to somewhere that never goes out. I just want to know somewhere about. So I was like, maybe you're helping me on my house, email list. I tried.
I was like, yeah, dig that hole.
And see if I can help them and be around them. Just try to like, someone like him. I try to go or whoever often. But that would be like, and then when they're over there with me, I feel like they're rare.
Sometimes the daily stuff's even better.
Then that'll encourage me
How they respond.
I always hate to cut off discussion, but I'm going to jump in anyway and encourage y'all to continue maybe discussing this later, because there may be ideas that other people take advantage of that could be helpful for you as well. The next discipline that I wanted to talk about is prayer. Obviously, prayer is a discipline of the Christian life. Ongoing communication with God, praying for our needs, asking God to come into situations. We know that prayer changes things. Sometimes God brings answers to our prayer exactly as we want. A lot of times he answers in different ways. But sometimes our praying really is changing things in us, increasing our faith, causing us to lean in more. And prayer is that, when I was in seminary, I had Wayne Grudem for one of my systematic theology classes, and he had us do an imitation and response worksheet, where we went around and basically, as we went through our days, we had been talking about the characters of God, and we were to figure out what are ways that we imitate those different characteristics, and then how, when we see that characteristic around us, how do we respond to it? And the one that I think about with God's omnipresence is the fact that, okay, I am not in any way omnipresent, but in prayer, I can be in places all around the world, even when I'm physically somewhere else. I can pray for people in China. I can pray for people in the Middle East. I can pray for people in Africa. And though I'm not physically there, my prayers enter into God's presence and make a difference in their lives. And in some small way, I can imitate that character of God. And so as we pray, and even as I say that, it just makes me so excited that God gives us that privilege, that we can be praying for people all around the world, all the time. And so I encourage you to find people that you can pray with. I had already known my wife, but where I got to know my wife was in a prayer group. So, if you're single, that might be something that God would use in your life too. I'm not promising anything, just saying. One of the most profound lessons I learned about prayer was from she was my language tutor, but I would go to this little Arab church, and I would pray once a month, and it wasn't even my night I would preach once a month, and it wasn't my night to preach, it was somebody else's. And they had said something about the situation in Iraq. This was back around the time of the Second Gulf War, maybe 1999, something like that. I guess it was actually a few years even before it. And this little old lady, Asma, for whatever reason, she said to me afterwards, and I forget the context exactly, but she said, every day I pray for Saddam Hussein, and I ask God to save him. And I was so convicted. Had I ever prayed that God would save Saddam Hussein? Had I ever asked God to change his heart? How do you pray? We look at the world around us, we look at ISIS, we look at all these things, and it seems like our world is going from bad to worse. But how many times do we pray that God would change those people's hearts and draw them to him? I can say I don't do it as often as I should. That when you see that image, that picture on a website or in the news, do you pray for that person? God, save that person's soul. We have a privilege as followers of Jesus that we can bring these people into his presence. And, Jesus told the Good Samaritan because he wanted people to understand that even the most hated Samaritans were the Jews' neighbors. I mean, the whole point of that parable is love your neighbor and everyone's your neighbor. But even if you still don't believe that, for example, certain people are your neighbors, guess what? He said, love your enemies and pray for those who hate you. So he doesn't let us off the hook no matter what. We need to be a people who are praying. And you know what? When we pray, sometimes it's our heart that changes. Where we had distrust and hatred towards someone, we suddenly have love. Operation World is an amazing resource for that. How many people are probably serving in countries before Operation World they didn't even know existed? And yet God captured their heart and put them there. I have discovered a new a prayer app called Prayer Mate. There's the website. And one of the things it does is each day I get from Open Doors, I get a persecuted group to pray for, and from Operation World, a country. Today it's Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, however you pronounce it, Ivory Coast. But it's a great way. I can carry it around with me. And it has personal prayer requests and other things. I can put my own prayer lists on here, and I take it wherever I go. So I encourage you, even if you don't want to put down the money for Operation World, here you can get a country a day to your phone for free. One of the things that I have done when I pray for missionaries is I get prayer letters. Sometimes it's by email, sometimes it's by snail mail. But especially when I got them all by snail mail, I had a folder, and I would keep all of the prayer letters in the folder, and I would pray for, when it was only a few, all of them every day, and then when I got a lot, it would be certain letters or half of it or whatever, and I'd go through it systematically. And then when a new letter came, I would take the old one out, put the new one in, and it was a way that I could continue going through those things and praying for the missionaries that were in my list. So there's all kinds of ways that we can make it easier for us to remember to pray. I love taking my cell phone and setting reminders at very bizarre times. I just kind of spin the thing, and so at 3:12 in the afternoon, suddenly it goes off and it says, "Pray for the lady that I met at the clinic in Jordan," or "Pray for whatever." And I got these things that remind me that there are people I want to be praying for at different times. What are some prayer resources that you all are aware of that would be beneficial to us as a group? Do you guys know? Are there anything that you found especially helpful? Say, I'm sorry.
Heartlight, they have scripture for listen for the day, and then they have meditation that they're both following prayer.
Okay.
Heartlight.
Heartline? Heartlight.
Heartlight.
Heartlight, okay. Yep.
Vacation is not Operation World anymore. It's called Pray for the World.
Okay, Pray for the World. It's not Operation World? Yeah.
Yeah, I know what it is.
Didn't even realize that, because it still comes on this thing as Operation World. So Pray for the World is the new name of the resource. Good. Yeah.
Just big newspaper, LA Times, New York Times, Washington Post. If you read the World section of those, every now and then there's something that will grab your heart. Or if you read about something in Burundi, you remember, oh, that person I met from Burundi. And just reading that, but not just to read for information, but to apply your heart to what God is doing in your heart.
Yeah. Can you all hear that? Okay.
The Psalms.
The Psalms, yeah. One of the things on PrayerMate that I like is that they have biblical prayers. And so they have 2 each day, the way I have it set up. And so a lot of times it's from the Psalms. But the Psalms are so chock full of God's heart for the nations. All kinds of great things, yeah. Psalms are good.
Joshua Project offers things you can pray for the nations.
Joshua Project, yeah. So there's resources. Did you say it's on their website, or I didn't?
Yeah, it's on their website.
Okay.
If you click a nation, you can scroll down and
Okay.
tell you things to pray for.
And they've got all kinds of detailed information, don't they? Because they do so much research. Yeah. Yep.
Decided to just set up a men's breakfast. Women are invited too, but we don't know what happened. It's 6 a.m, and we just pray once a week. We try to keep the nations on the radar.
Yeah. Good. There's no, I mean, it's the beauty of relationship, isn't it? There's no end to the ways we pursue friends in relationship. There's no end to the ways we can pursue God in prayer and hold these things out. So thank you for the things that were shared. I know that there were a lot more. But so seek out other people and find out what it is that they do. Prayer can feel like a chore sometimes. It can. But it can also be we can find ways to make it come alive. Do you have one more thing that you want to
I'm
add?
just going to remind everybody, Franklin Graham's going to be in Nashville tomorrow, and it'll be live streamed. We're streaming it into our church. Of course, a lot of people took buses, I guess, but it's prayer for the nation, for our political leaders. It's tomorrow at 1 o'clock our time, 12 Nashville.
Thursday is the National Day of Prayer. And Wednesday night, I know at our church, they're having a special prayer event, 2 Rivers. But so joining those kinds of things are very helpful, especially as the nations are coming to our country. Oftentimes, there's a lot that we can be praying for that. Okay, I had hoped to get slightly further than I did before our break, but I think that we should take our break probably, and we'll come back, and either I'll talk fast or I'll go over next time. All right. Before the break, we talked about prayer and discussed some prayer resources. The next discipline is simplicity. And simplicity is one of those disciplines that flies in the face of American culture. You know, we are such an affluent nation, and the American dream and what we as Americans consider kind of our right anymore in terms of our homes and our cars and our different things that we have. The concept of simplicity is sometimes lost. But you're going to read an article this week by Ralph Winter that talks about how our mentality needs to be wartime, not peacetime. That we need to take that attitude like people do when there's a war, that, you know, during wartime you ration what you have, and you're very careful about what you use, and you share what you have with others who have need, because you know you're in a battle and you're not going to waste things. And in peacetime, those things relax, and we're not that way. And so we want to be a people who are really careful and use the things that God has given us wisely. We are stewards. We have to take that attitude that everything we have is actually God's. And so what we do with it, we're accountable ultimately to Him. One of the things that Angie and I really appreciated was one summer when we were coming back, we needed a vehicle to drive our family, 5 of us around. And some dear friends of ours, they had 2 cars. One was a little Geo Prism, and the other one was a minivan. And they didn't offer us the Prism, they offered us the minivan. And they too had a family of 5. And I thought, what a sacrifice that they would let us take their minivan, drive it literally thousands of miles around the country, and they would suffer in the heat of central Illinois in that little Prism. But it was such a ministry to us, and it was they knew they could get along with one car for a summer for the sake of someone who was doing God's work. Regularly, our family goes through our closet and we realize, okay, I don't need 5 red shirts. I think I can get along with 4, and we give those away. And there's a number of ministries here in town that especially work with refugees and love those kinds of things. But don't do what there was one missionary closet at a church we went to that they stocked used tea bags. Don't do that. Give the unused stuff and make sure it's the best. We just couldn't believe it. Really? The missionaries get the used tea bags. No, I don't think that. We see the example in Scripture of the widow giving her 2 mites. It's all that she had to live on. But often what we give is from our surplus. Rarely do we give sacrificially. Rarely do we give in a way that it actually has an impact on us. We need to be the kind of people, as we seek to live those lives of simplicity, that are ready to do those kinds of things, giving in a way that's truly, at times, a sacrifice. If you have school debt, one of the ways you can live a life of simplicity is pay your school debt off. There are so many people who want to go overseas and cannot do it because they have huge amounts of debt that they need to take care of. There are some groups out there that will help you if you're going overseas to get some of that paid off, and you can investigate those kinds of things. But I encourage you, to do anything you can to declutter, to get yourself out of debt, to get yourself in a place that should God call you, maybe not even outside the country, maybe simply to another place where He might want you to serve, that it would not be a challenging thing for you to be able to do that you would be ready to go. When Angie and I were in medical school and seminary, and we were living below the poverty line, and that sounds crazy, but it's really true. God was so gracious to us so many times through the generosity of people. There was one day the doorbell rang, and we were in an apartment, so it was the downstairs doorbell, and we went and tried to buzz somebody in there. There was nobody there, so we finally went downstairs, and here was this box of groceries with our name on it. And we think we know who it was, but to this day we don't know for sure who it was. Or another time, Angie and I were praying, just wondering how God was going to provide what we needed for that month. And while we were praying, the mailman came. And so we finished praying, we went to the mailbox, and here was a letter. It was from a friend of ours in college. He said, I got a bonus this week and wanted to give my money to something in missions, and I thought, what could I do better than send it to people who were preparing to be missionaries? And so there was a check for $500 in this envelope. Now, obviously, God had moved her before we prayed, but still, it was such a blessing. So living those lives of simplicity where we really consider what we have to be God's and we're ready to give and give generously is a huge thing. And I just invite you, to be pondering, how can I be more that kind of person? Another discipline that they talk about in the book and you're reading is learning. I hope that you have a commitment to be a lifelong learner. It's one of the things that I love is constantly learning new things. If we commit ourselves to that pattern to continue learning, it's one of the ways we keep ourselves sharp and we continue to grow. One of the things I did at the beginning of 2015 was I set a goal for myself that I would read one fiction and one nonfiction book every month. And I would read, fiction because as a pastor and as somebody who preaches, I want to be a good storyteller. And so reading good stories helps me, I think, to become a better storyteller. But in nonfiction, I read books on spiritual formation, like More, When a Little Bit of the Holy Spirit's Not Enough, or what else did I read? I forget. Emotionally Healthy Leadership. Or I would read books about missions and ministry. And so I'd have things like Understanding Arabs, or Wind in the House of Islam, or Miraculous Movements. Then there would be biographies, maybe one on Amy Carmichael, or one on, Brother Yoon, or Lilias Trotter, or somebody like that. And then you can also be reading periodicals. Evangelical Missions Quarterly, EMQ, comes out now electronically and can be a really great resource that helps you to understand some of the things that are happening in missions. Seedbed is one that talks specifically about Muslim ministry, and I think it's now put out by Pioneers, isn't it? Don Little is the one who I think puts that together. Anyway, he used to be with Arab World Ministries back before it merged with Pioneers. That's why I think it might be that. But finding different books and things that help you to grow and stretch you is really important. And I realize not everybody, especially if you're a student, has time to read books beyond what you're reading for school. But even if it's a book where you just read even a chapter a month, something that's helping you to be thinking about missions, to be thinking about spiritual things, and keep your mind and your heart going in that direction. I think some of the other ways that we can be learners is taking advantage. Lots of churches around us have missions weeks and festivals and things, and so there are opportunities to go and be a part of those things. Groups like KIN are offering training if you want to get a certificate to teach English. You can do that. There are ways that you can definitely prepare yourself and expand what you can do. We used to love hosting missionaries when they were visiting, and I encourage you, take advantage of every chance you can. Even if they're not staying overnight with you, have a meal and invite some friends over and ask them questions and let them tell you their heart. Ask them about their ministry and what they're doing, and even the kinds of things, I used to love the folks that would invite us over, and they wanted to hear about the ministry, but then they also wanted to know about just how are you doing? How can we pray for your family? What are your struggles? Because you know what? It's not all victory. There are some really hard things. And there are so many families that are dear, dear friends today because every time we were back, every 2 years, we got to spend some time with them. They'd have a cookout, we'd come over, whatever. And now, in fact, one of the families, it's so cool because they moved to South Carolina, we're in Knoxville, and he comes through here for business. And so he and I will get together and be able to continue our friendship and encouraging one another. So it's an opportunity for you to learn. It's an opportunity for you to then even know how to pray better. It's an opportunity for you perhaps to experience God's invitation, because a lot of those people we visited with, then we were able to invite to come on a short-term trip, or we were able to share with them specific needs that we had in Jordan, and they or someone they knew were the right people to come and to help us out with those needs. And so it can also be a way for you to connect sometimes the right people in the right situation. All right. I want to take a minute at this point before we move on to the next part, and I didn't do this, so I'm going to double it up. at your tables for a moment, the 2 questions, and we're going to spend only like 4 minutes, so share quickly. Don't do a lot of explanation. Do short explanation. But what are some ways that you can live a life of simplicity, and what are some resources or some ways that you have found are helpful in being a lifelong learner in the areas of missions and God's heart for the world? So just share some resources you're aware of. Just real quickly, we'll take about 4 minutes. I realize I'm not being fair. I'm just giving you enough time to kind of tease you, but not enough to really exhaustively talk about these things. But it's that old principle: leave them wanting more. So hopefully you guys will continue these discussions later. 2 things before we move on to the next section. The Lord brought to mind just a verse that I think really, in a lot of ways, captures for me these disciplines. As we seek after Jesus, as we are trying to create space in our lives for the Holy Spirit to work so that we can be obedient to His leading in our lives, that we will really walk out being world Christians, and we have hopefully healthy rhythms and community and prayer and simplicity and learning. Psalm 9, verse 10, those who know your name trust in you. For you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. And what I love about this verse, the Lord drew my attention to it at a particularly significant time, but those who know your name. In the Old Testament, name was more than just Rick or Chad or Jim. It was your character. It was who you are. The names of God reveal who God is to us. Those who know God's name, those who know His character, put their trust in Him. For you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. So as we give ourselves to these disciplines, as we seek after God in these things, He will not forsake us. These are the kinds of things that He delights to see His people pursue, because they create space for Him to work in their lives. They create that space so that He can transform us, He can change us into the image of Jesus and lead us in the direction He wants to take us. All right. The other thing I was going to say before we move on is I handed out, if you didn't get one, I asked some extras, this grand exam, and all it is it's I usually use this at the beginning of the year, but as you are hopefully taking some time to kind of do some more reflection on where God might be leading you, what you might be wanting to see happen in your life, this might be a pattern. These might be some things that are helpful in that exercise. So I offer that to you as a tool. You can save it for the whatever. You can use it as fodder for your fire next winter if you want, however you'd like to use that. So, all right, let's move on to the practices of the World Christian Journey. Now, in previous editions of Perspectives, they talked not about practices, but they talked about roles. And they talked about, the different things like, let's see. Going, sending, welcoming, mobilizing, learning, the different roles that a person might take as they're pursuing God's heart and purpose for the world. The reason why in this edition they call them practices is because they discovered that a lot of times people, when they thought it in terms of role, they kind of slotted themselves in. I am a sender, or I am a goer, or I am a prayer. And they didn't realize that, while that might be your primary calling, we're still to be involved in all of these things. And so rather than thinking of, well, this is who I am, this is my slot, we should think of these are all things that each of us practice, though some of them may in certain seasons be our primary focus. We get to the privilege of practicing all of them. Rather than a rule, they're a practice. So going is one. When you're talking about God's heart for the world, one of the things that we most readily go to is the idea that God calls us to go. That He desires people to incarnate the gospel in other cultures, to learn the language. And we've talked about what does that look like? What does it look like for us to bring the gospel in ways that are culturally appropriate and break down barriers and allow people to hear it? And for a lot of us, God puts a burden on our heart. God puts that call in us. Sometimes it builds over time. Sometimes it's a sudden thing. a burning bush type experience. But whatever it is, we have this burden, this desire that we would go. For me, it was, as I said, it was this challenge. Would I be willing to go anywhere and do anything? And when I said yes, then God put me on this path that ultimately led 10 years later to be in Jordan. And so if we are called to go in long-term service, one of the questions that comes up then is, well, how do I pick an agency to serve with? How do I know which one is the right one? Well, you may be a part of a denomination that is sending people, and so it may be sort of an easy decision for you that you would go with your denomination either because they support their missionaries 100%, or there would be, that you believe in what they're doing, you have a heart that is similar to theirs, and it would be easier to raise your support in their network of churches. But if that's not the case, here are some questions that I suggest, and they're not exhaustive, but they're just the ones that I thought of. What do they believe? Is their statement of faith something that you can say yes to? Are they clear on the things that you feel they should be clear on? What is required? Do you have to go through certain training? Some groups want you to have a certain number of Bible hours or theology hours before you would go overseas. Or they might have certain support requirements that go beyond what other groups do. And maybe it makes sense. Maybe actually the more support is better but you have to evaluate that. Why is it so high? What are the administrative costs? Where are they going? And weigh those things. Is this something that I'm comfortable with? Is this something that that makes sense? What do they do? Are they a church planning mission, or are they going to do teaching? Maybe they specifically do English teaching, and they're about evangelism, but not so much about church planting. Maybe they're a group that's only doing church planting, and they don't take holistic approaches, and so they don't want people that are coming out as doctors or other things. So what kind of mission are they, and what kind of roles are available? You'd hate to apply, because let's be honest, some of these applications are enormous, and go through the process and then find out, oh, we can't actually use you. That would be frustrating. So find out those kinds of things. And then how do they do it? Do they send you out as teams? Do they really send you out as teams? I've seen groups that say, yes, we send out as teams, but they send out a couple or a single, and the rest of the team is supposed to come when they get their support raised. Well, you should know that. That may not be a healthy situation for you. Or is the team going to get all of its support raised and they go together? Or is there a team already there that's going to receive you? Some of these kinds of things are important. Personally, the reason why I'm emphasizing team is because I think team is important. It's the way we support one another, and it's the way Jesus sent out in groups, and it seems to make a lot of sense to me. Or some missions, though, align very closely with the local church, and some prefer to work outside or parallel. So what's their relationship, and are you okay with that? Does it make sense in that context? In some contexts, there isn't a local church, or the local church that's there is hostile towards evangelism. So there's perhaps reasons not to work under the local church. In other places, it might be in cooperation, but separate, because the nature and the sensitivity of these house churches is such that formal connection would actually be dangerous to both sides. So these are the kinds of questions that you can ask and find out. What's their philosophy? What are they doing? And then does that fit with what you understand and what you feel like God's called you to? So those are just some questions that I would encourage you to consider. Short term is another way we go. When I was in Jordan, we for about 9 years oversaw an 8-week program where primarily college students, some were older 20s. We never had folks much into their 30s, but it would be people that would come and they would spend 8 weeks in Jordan learning Arabic, teaching English, and it gave them great opportunity to really immerse in the culture. They lived in apartments. They learned how to use public transportation. They were learning some Arabic so they could get around. I had a group show up one night knocking on the door. We don't know what to do. We were sharing our faith at this garden, and we were giving out Bibles, and the police took Justin in, and we don't know what to do. Okay, all right, so calm down. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pray about it, and then we'll try to figure something out. It was a great story, though, because the police took this guy in, and they sat and they questioned him, and they were waiting for their supervisor to come. The supervisor never showed up. And so finally, one of the policemen said to these guys, is this what you were giving out to people? Yeah, that's it. What? This is an Injil? It's a Bible? Yeah, it is. Can I have it? Yeah, sure, no problem. And then the other policeman, can I have one too? Yeah. Our friend is praying in the other room. Can we take one for him? Sure, no problem. You go ahead. So, and we eventually connected back with them, and everything was okay. But things would happen. We had another short-term team that they really wanted to plunge in. They'd only been there a couple days. They were going to teach English, and they were hungry, so they decided before class, we'll pop in this restaurant. They come in. They ask this guy seats them. They ask for menus, and he says, "You are my brothers. I will pick for you." Okay, all right, sure, why not? So the first course comes out, and it's sheep hearts. Right? So they're like, "Oh, this is nice," and so they eat a little bit and cut it up and push it around the plate, and then come the stuffed intestines. And so they do sort of the same thing, and he's so excited. What did you think? It was interesting. So they said, can we take this to go? We have to leave. So they did. Well, the next day, the next time they were teaching, it was one of those, the restaurant was, the second floor came out over the sidewalk. So the sign for the restaurant was actually on the face of the second floor, but they'd been walking underneath it, so they hadn't seen the sign. Had they seen the sign, it's a picture with a heart and intestines. They would have known exactly what they were getting themselves into. But they had such a great attitude even in the midst of that. And they laughed about it, and they learned about it, and they were much more careful where they ate after that. But we found that so many of the students who came, so many of the young people that came, are still involved in ministry in different ways. They didn't come back to Jordan. Some did, a few did. A lot of them went to other places. Some went to the different stands, and there were some in Egypt and other. Anyway, it captured their heart. Coming and being a part of things impacted, the vast majority of them in such significant ways that till today they're involved in different ways in missions. And sometimes short terms can be more about the person going than the people receiving. The fruit for this group, for many of these groups, still goes on as they are friends with these people that were resettled. One group was teaching Iraqi refugees who were going with the UN to different places. Others were teaching Jordanians, and they still keep in touch with their friends. And some have come to faith, and others haven't. But they still have those relationships. And so it was the kind of thing. One of the things that we felt very important was, and I think this is a question that you'd want to ask is how will the short-term ministry connect to the long-term workers? Are we as short-termers creating opportunities for the long-termers, or are we just creating work for them? So is our presence actually going to increase their contacts and the people they can meet with, or are we just one more thing they have to do for a few weeks because we're there? So it's important to know that. With all the refugees right now that are in, for example, Jordan or in different places, Europe, you could go and there's so many things you can do, but you want to ask that question. Will we be helping, or will we be getting in the way, creating more work? A second question is related to what I've already said. How will the mission advance the ministry of the people on the ground? I already said that. Okay, sorry. What kind of cultural orientation will there be? Are we just coming in and you're going to expect us to have already figured it out, or are you going to help us out at the front end? Maybe before we leave, maybe once we get there. I found that really important, especially with my 8-week groups. I did a full 5 days of orientation before we got started. I got somebody in there to teach them some real basic Arabic. I helped them to understand honor and shame culture. I wanted them to understand a little bit more of the mindset and why certain things were going to be different than what they expected. I wanted them to understand why they had to dress conservatively. I wanted them to understand how females should ride in taxis, and so many little things that you and I wouldn't think of. And you don't want to get stuck in the wrong place because nobody took the time to help you at the beginning, just with some simple things. But we also had a lot of fun with them. We would sometimes give them like a scavenger hunt, and we'd drop them off in the middle of downtown, and they'd have a couple hours to do two things. One, find the things on the list, and two, get themselves back to where we were waiting for them with dinner. So, and you know what? We never lost one. Well, no, we didn't lose any. That's true. Okay. Is there a mechanism for follow-up? You know, if we come as a short-term group and we generate all these people, great. But if you can't ever follow them up, what's the point? It might be, not that God can't use that, but I'd feel much more comfortable coming into a situation where I know that the people that we contact with are there's going to be an ongoing relationship. And so to find out, well, okay, so if we do create all these great opportunities, are there people that are going to see this through? Are there people we can turn things over to? So those are some of the questions that I would ask as you're thinking about a short-term group. Another way that we can go is business and mission, or things like USAID. And what I'm thinking here is oftentimes we have opportunities to go with work. Opportunities, maybe we work for companies that have branches in the Middle East, in Europe, in South America, and we could go. I had some friends who specifically chose he worked at Caterpillar, was a very successful engineer, and when there was an opportunity to be stationed in Paris for 2 years, jumped at that opportunity. They got there, they as a family learned French, they immersed themselves as much as they could in French culture, they went to French church, because they wanted to reach out to their neighbors. They wanted to be a part of what was going on there. And so they were not missionaries in the true sense, but as business people there, they served. We often saw people who would come working with USAID. Maybe one guy I can think of was working, they were taking all the legal records in Jordan and they were putting them on computer, and so he was a part of that project. Another guy was helping to oversee a project that developed the baptismal site of Jordan, so it was an archaeological thing. Other people were on water projects, and so there were opportunities for them to come because of their work. In some cases, the U.S. government was paying their way, but they saw it that wasn't their main purpose for being there. They were there as witnesses for Jesus. And so it may be that you have the kind of occupation that the world needs, and you can use that to go and to be the light of Jesus Christ through your business, through what you do. There was another person who went, and he was an entrepreneur, and he wanted to go and start a business, and his idea was, it had to do with tires and a certain, I don't even remember what it was exactly, but it was something so different and so unique. But his goal and his desire was to go and to start this business, to find some Jordanian partners that he could work with. Eventually he was praying that they would come to know the Lord, or he would find Muslim background believers that he could then turn the business over to at some point, and they could continue it as a means to help themselves and others. So there's all kinds of things. I used to have a saying when we were overseas: if you can dream it, God can do it. There's all kinds of adventure camping ideas that I had, and nobody would ever take me up on it. I had this great idea. See, I had ideas, but I wasn't the business person. I had the idea of establishing a women-only taxi service. Pink taxis that only women drivers and only women could use. And do you know, 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine sent me a picture. They just started. After 10 years after my idea. And do I get anything from it? No, forget about it. But he sent me the picture, and two people did. They sent me the article because I had talked about it so often, and people kind of laughed at me. I tell you. And then there's finishers. We saw folks who would be at retirement age or near retirement age, and rather than retiring, they got their certificate to teach English as a second language, and they headed off to China or to somewhere in the Middle East to teach English. A principal who had retired came and served as principal at a small school for missionary kids for 2 years. When they were in need of a principal, he donated his time and he served the missionary community. A lot of teachers who had reached that retirement age came to places where they could serve the missionary families by teaching their children. So there's all kinds of ways that, even though you might think, well, I'm 65 or I'm 70 or whatever, I can't do this. No, even you are not off the hook. There are opportunities for you. We actually one year had a lady in her 70s who wanted to come for the 8-week trip, but her daughter got sick, and so she wasn't able to come. So, all right. And then there's, so going is one way that we can practice, sending is another. And, we are a very affluent culture. And, even when Angie and I were missionaries, we were still supporting other missionaries. That was something that was very important to us. Some we had started supporting before we left for the field, and then others we had met while we were on the field. We have been supporting some families for over 20 years because we believe in them so much. And then there are others that we've supported just for a little while and not continued for different reasons. How is God leading you to use the gifts and the resources you have for His glory? I remember the first time I ever did something that required raising support, and I wrote a letter to my great aunt, and I asked her if she would be willing to support me on this little outreach thing. When my mother found out that I'd asked my aunt, who lives on a fixed income, and she had sent me a $25 check, my mother was so mad at me. And yet, Aunt Vesta, she wrote me the check in the sweetest letter and promised to pray for me. You don't know who God will use. And even though it sometimes seems like a drop in the bucket, enough drops in the bucket and the bucket gets filled. So whatever it is that God puts on your heart to give, I encourage you, give generously. Anyway, give to people you trust. I think that's one thing that I would say. If somebody comes to you and they're going to go overseas or going on a trip, do you see the things in their life that make you think that they're going to bear fruit when they get overseas? D.L. Moody and Hudson Taylor and people like that would ask potential missionaries, what did you read in the Bible this morning, and who's the last person you led to Christ? Those are great questions, because if you're not doing it in your home culture, what makes you think you're going to do it when you get to a different culture? So are these people you trust? Do you see them living the kind of lifestyle that you think fits with where it is they say they're going? Give to causes you believe in. You may have a great friend who's going to go and do a ministry that you actually just think is really silly. Well, you know what? You may not be the one called to give to that ministry then. There may be somebody else you don't even know, but they're going and they're doing something that you are so convinced is the right thing. Give to causes you believe in. Things that you can pray for. Things that as you give with your whole heart, not with reluctance. And then, as I said before, give generously. We can't outgive God. And on the other hand, for some people, like my Aunt Vesta, that $25, that was very generous. That was probably like the widow's 2 mites. That was a sacrifice. So even if it's very small, give. And this is for those of you who will one day be in support raising mode. I always took the attitude when I was in the process of raising support that it really wasn't about the money. It was about being faithful to just share the vision and to go wherever God wanted. And there was one time I was invited to speak at a luncheon. It wasn't my church. I think I was probably the third choice. And I had very low expectations of what was going to come out of it. But I said, Lord, if you want me to go, I'll go. And sure enough, I shared, and it was great. They asked questions. It was a good visit, but it didn't seem that there was any support. And then I got a letter a few days later from one lady who said, "Thank you so much for sharing," and she decided she wanted to give. And I was so surprised by that. And I thought, Lord, thank you that I didn't, let my preconceived notions of what would or wouldn't come out of that stop me from going. And it's not because I got that support, but it was a reminder that I can't know what God's doing in people's hearts. And it's not for me to decide ahead of time based on certain responses, yes or no, I'll go. Jesus didn't do that, right? I mean, he healed 10 lepers and only one came back. But he didn't say, well, I'm not going to heal you because you're not going to come back and say thank you. He did it anyway. And so, anyway, give generously. And those of you who have that opportunity, don't steal the opportunity for somebody to give just because you're embarrassed or you don't think they'll respond. Because by extending the invitation, you're actually giving them an opportunity to respond, perhaps if God is moving in their heart. Another practice that we can have is the practice of welcoming. And, East Tennessee is filled with people coming from many other countries. International students are coming to area universities. We have refugees who are being resettled to this part of the country. And one of the things you notice is that when one refugee family comes, inevitably there are more that come as well, as word gets out that there are some others follow. There are opportunities with places like ORNL where you have internationals come and they will work. You have big universities where you have people who come as professors. There are all kinds of opportunities all around us to meet people that are from outside the United States. Without question, the world is at our doorstep. I came across this week that there are 1.2 million international students in the U.S., and I actually, when I saw that, I thought it was in some ways it feels less than what I would have thought. The article that I saw said there are 4.5 million international students worldwide and 1.2 million are in the U.S. Of the ones in the U.S., 55% are from restricted access countries. So countries where the gospel is restricted, where it is persecuted to be a Christian. 3 of the top 4, China with 31% of the international students are from China, 14% are from India, and 6% are from Saudi Arabia. The only one that I didn't mention there is South Korea. South Korea has 7%, but that's not a restricted access country, so it didn't fit in my slide. But these are 3 of the top 4 are restricted access countries. So the world is coming to our doorstep. International Students Incorporated estimates that over 23,000 international students have come to faith over the last 2 years. That's more than 1 an hour for the last 2 years. That's amazing. We can pray that either we can pray that they would be grounded in their faith, they would be discipled well, so that as they go back, in whatever the context they go back to, hostile or not, they would be able to continue walking out their faith, and in fact their families would respond as well. We had a group that came to Jordan for a week from one of our supporting churches in Peoria and had a reunion with them last fall. And it was great to sit with this one family in particular, and they said, since the time we were in Jordan, when we came back, we have had internationals from Bradley University in our home all the time. And they said, you have to help us understand. We have little girls that we want to get to bed at a decent hour. This Saudi couple comes, they bring their kids, and they're there till midnight. They won't leave. The single people go home, and they're still there. I said, yeah, Arabs love to yisharu. They love to stay up late. They're just getting started. 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe they'll head to bed. It's crazy. So they're like, okay, so this is normal? I said, yeah, they like you. Okay. Around your table, take a moment just to think of some ways that you guys can be welcomers. What are some things that you're aware of beyond international students? I focused on that, but some of the other ways as well that we've talked about. Are there other ways that you can be a welcomer in your community that you're aware of? Tell you what. Why don't you let's call out a couple of them. We'll keep this moving a little bit quicker, but maybe if 2 or 3 people have some ideas of ways that you can be a welcomer. So with refugees, there's all kinds of Bridge is one group, and Global Seeds is another, and a lot of churches as well are doing things directly. ESL. Yeah, one of the things that I tell folks that go to Bible college especially, great, get a Bible degree, but make sure you're getting something else that you can use, like an English certificate or something, because you can use that anywhere. You can use it right here with the ones that are coming, or you can go overseas, and everybody around the world wants to learn English, except maybe the Brits. They continue to talk crazy, I don't know. I'm just kidding, I love Brits. If only I had that accent, right? You'd really be enjoying this. Anything else? Yeah, neighbors. So many of your neighbors, they come home and they leave, they come home and they leave, and nobody ever knocks on their door. You walk around the store, you see a lady who's covered, or you see somebody, And you know what? Just going, for the women anyway, going to that lady and saying hello would be enormous. If the guy did, then probably not so much. But just being friendly to folks in the store, in your neighborhood, is huge. Because so many of them are so isolated and feel so alone. There was a girl from Jordan who came to study in the United States, and when she came back for a Christmas vacation, we asked her, well, what do you think? How was your time? She said, Americans are so unfriendly. Really? She said, yeah, they never want to go and have meals with me. We said, really? Nobody ever asked you to go for dinner? Oh, they only asked once. Well, in Jordanian culture, you have to say no 3 times. If you're not asked 3 times, then the person didn't really mean it. I told her, no, in America, they ask once. If you say no, they think you're the one that's rude. Oh, she had a much better second semester. One of the most successful, that's not the right way to say it, one of the most fruitful evangelists in Jordan for a number of years studied in Alabama. He was a Muslim guy who came to know Jesus because an elderly couple had gotten involved in an outreach to international students and started having him into their home. For Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for whatever, they invited him to church, and he came to faith in Jesus Christ. And he went back to Jordan, and he had the conviction that he was going to lead as many of his family, as many of his people as he could to Jesus. And God used him in really significant ways for a number of years. Incredible persecution. One day, I was talking to him, and he said, yeah, I was called into the secret police. That's the 102nd time so far. So you count? He said, yeah, I have nothing better to do. So, Carolyn, were you going to say something?
Volunteering in communities like Lonsdale, or which I'm going to do, or this would take more of a commitment, but moving into neighborhoods where people kind of tend to move into areas in neighborhoods. So like maybe Hispanics here and Indian here and Chinese over there and Muslim over here. So maybe moving into a neighborhood where
being a presence in a neighborhood where there's a high concentration of a group that you have a heart to reach. That's good. All right. We are rapidly running out of time. The next practice to talk about is mobilization. Mobilizing encompasses many things. I think a lot of times when we think of mobilizing, we think of recruiting. We think of somebody who's going out there and trying to find people and encourage them to go and getting them to sign up on the dotted line. Haha, you're ours now. You will serve in some Siberian prison for the rest of your life. But mobilizing goes beyond that. It's really, I think, mobilizing oftentimes is connecting resources. It's talking to one person who really, maybe is an engineer, and then meeting somebody else who said, yeah, my business is going to this country and we really need an engineer. Or it's somebody who says, yeah, I really have a heart to do X, and somebody else who says, yeah, my church is getting ready to go and do X. And it's saying, hey, you guys should talk to each other. It's saying, I have this desire to serve God in this way, but I'm not sure how to get started. Hey, I know just the person you could talk to. So mobilizing goes beyond some of those things. Sometimes it's just helping people to connect the dots. Other times it's seeing something in a person and saying, have you ever considered that you're really gifted at learning languages? Have you ever considered that maybe you should think about going overseas? Or, there is such a need for people with that skill on the mission field. Have you ever investigated how you might be able to use that? Or, as a water treatment expert, have you ever contacted USAID or one of these organizations that's working in the desert trying to make water flow? You could be the person who is the light of Jesus in that place. It's reading that article in the newspaper, or maybe praying something and having this weird burden and having the guts to speak it out loud, and it touches somebody's heart, and it allows them to move in a direction. I've had more than one person who has said to me, Rick, do you remember you told me about X, or you connected me with this person by email or whatever it was, and sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't, but they say, that relationship was so significant, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if it wasn't for that. So, mobilization, it's more than what we think it is. And while some people are really gifted at it, and that's what they do, all of us can do it at different times if we will just be paying attention and listening. Another way that we can mobilize is oftentimes the churches we go to have missions committees, and their strategies aren't very well thought out. And we can be someone who could come and could speak into that situation and help them to maybe do it just a little bit differently or a little bit better. Or maybe it's finding some folks who do. There's a course that I have not taught, but I'm familiar with, crafting your mission strategy. To invite somebody who would come in and lead your missions committee into thinking about what are our priorities and how are we going to do this. One of the things that I did when I was the missions intern at this big church is they asked me to do an analysis of where they were giving. And so I did. I broke it all down into percentages, and I had charts, and I had the whole thing. And so I presented to them. I am so glad that they were not armed that evening, because I think they would have shot the messenger. They were so mad at me. I said, I've only been coming to this church for a year. It's not my fault that you're giving most of your money to administration and very little to church planting. I didn't do that. But it caused them to start thinking, how do we shift? If we want to be a church that's giving to see the gospel spread, administrative things can be helpful, but we need to do more in these other areas. How are we going to do that? All right. So, I forgot that I had these slides. Okay, number 4, and we're finishing up here in the next couple of minutes. Find your part in the world Christian movement. What is it that God is stirring in your heart? You know, at the beginning of the evening, I encouraged you to think about developing a rule of life, to develop a spiritual rhythm that would allow you to connect with God more intimately, and that would include God's heart for the world. And so I challenge you, I encourage you, as you're thinking about what your part in the world Christian movement is, don't forget, we need to be a person-driven group. We need to be person-driven disciples. Keep Jesus at the center of everything. Let's not elevate mission above our Savior. Let's make sure that He's the one who's directing us. Somewhere in one of the readings, and I couldn't find it later to remember, maybe it wasn't even in the reading, but I saw this quote and I thought it was really profound. Living for God's purpose in the world is not an issue of location, but lordship and lifestyle. It doesn't matter where you are, if you're where God has called you to be. The issue is lordship and lifestyle. Will you live in such a way that you are willing and available for whatever God might have for you? Will you live in such a way that you're willing to die to self and to bring glory to Him? You know, I encourage you to, we need to be connected to a local church. It's really tempting sometimes to go off and do our own thing. And that's not always bad. Sometimes the church we attend may not have a missions program or may not have, a strategy that will help us move along. And so there are times when we might step out of that, and yet somehow we need to be connected. Maybe it's through a sister church. Maybe it's inviting leaders in our church, the pastor, someone. But we just have to be really careful about going out on our own. Apart from accountability, apart from the support of a home church, of a sending church, apart from people who can take care of us. Because sometimes things don't go as well as we would want them to on the field. And we need a place to come home to. And so I just encourage you to make sure that you have that structure and that we don't miss it. And then on the other side, when there is a local church where we're going, let's not be so arrogant that we, the arrogant Westerners who, well, we're doing it better, so we're not going to relate to you at all. Even if it's only a polite, we're here to do ministry in this place, which they may not have a heart to do, and that's okay. We need to at least have there should be something that honors them for what they are and what they do in some way, even if at the end of the day we end up working separate. As much as it is on our shoulders, we should live at peace with all people, especially those who would call themselves brothers and sisters in the Lord. Partnerships as well. I've seen time and time again, we really are better together than we are apart. One of the things I loved in Jordan, and I know this isn't the case everywhere, but it was in Jordan, is it wasn't even originally my idea, but somehow I ended up being in charge of this group of all the different mission leaders that were working in Amman and throughout the country. We would come together once a month and just pray for one another. We'd encourage one another. It was another one of those networking places where, the YWAM person would say, we've got these English classes over the summer, but a lot of our teachers are leaving, and the Southern Baptist or the Pioneers or the OM guy would say, what, we got short-term people coming, we don't know what to do with them, and we would connect those resources. Or somebody else would say, we've got this medical clinic, and we have a doctor, but we really need a nurse, or we have a nurse and we need a doctor. Oh my goodness, we've got somebody coming. And it was a way that we as the body of Christ were working together with one another. And so you had an English center that was sponsored by the Jordan Baptist Society. The leadership was YWAM, and the teachers were pretty much every organization you can think of. And yet we worked together in seeing the gospel preached and churches planted. It was beautiful. So we need each other. And we need each other here. One of the things that astounds me is how many churches in Knoxville do ministry in Guatemala. And I've wondered, even as you were talking about how they coordinate to do ministry in Knoxville, why don't we coordinate to do ministry in other places? How many places are we double doing things because we don't communicate and don't work together? So even right here, wouldn't it be amazing if one of the things that came out of Perspectives is that all the churches represented here decided somehow to work together in reaching something? That's really nebulous, but God will work that out. You know what I mean. You know my heart. So, there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. When we work together, we exemplify what it really means to be a part of the body of Christ and bringing together the unity that is ours in Christ. You're going to do your readings if you haven't already. You're going to work on your last review. And we're going to have a celebration next Monday night. And it might feel a little bit anticlimactic, You really might not know what to do with all those hours that you spent reading and whatnot. But please, don't let too much time go before you seek God to know, is there something beyond what maybe you've already thought that He's inviting you into? To make that decision, to actually act on that intention, and to look, what are the means? What are the things that I need to do so that I can be moving in that direction? You have a number of resources that have been mentioned throughout the course. I don't know if you have my email. If you don't, I'm happy to give it to you. I'm sure Chad and others would want to do that as well. Any way we can serve you, we're ready to do that. So before I absolutely finish, there's one thing that I do want us to do, and maybe we'll get a chance to do this next week, but just in case, because I might not be there Monday night, I want to say, Chad, thank you to you. You have done a fantastic job as the coordinator, and I think that as somebody who has been a coordinator in the past, it is not an easy job, and it's often a very thankless job, but I have appreciated your leadership. I've appreciated your heart. I've appreciated the way you have brought together a number of different people. And so I say thank you, Chad. And I also, let's give... You even got your own slide, so I think that says it all right there. Jim, I think you've done a fantastic job leading the graders, and so I thank you for that as well. I'm so thankful for Mrs. Jones, who has brought us meals and made sure we were well fed. Thank you. Cindy, you've been a part of the team as well, but what I've appreciated personally is just the conversations you and I have had so many Monday nights, so thank you for that. Who am I missing? Tim, were you on the... You and I were not at the same coordinating team meeting, so I don't know. But
I was in China part of the time.
okay, so your time in China was really good, and so I'm really thankful for it. Anyway, all that to say is I am really grateful for all of you and what you've put into this class, and so thank you. So.